Much for everyone for showing up today. We're very excited to put on a great webcast for everyone. Today's webcast will run 60 minutes, and before we dive into the content, would love to very quickly go over some housekeeping items. Everyone in attendance will receive a copy of today's presentation, so if you're dialing in late or have to leave early, no worries there. We have you covered. We encourage audience questions. There should be a Q&A feature on your GoToWebinar sidebar, so please submit all your questions via that Q&A box. And we realize that obviously time is limited today, so any unanswered questions will be addressed by our entire team, both the Ardent team and the CXC Global team, via email in the days to follow the webcast. As I had said, please ask questions via that Q&A box. All your lines will be muted today. If you have any issues whatsoever with the webcast itself, the connection, or anything, please contact the GoTo help desk or run or ask a question about if there's anything to see we can do to help you there. And like I said, today's webinar will run 60 minutes. For those of you that are attending in live in the audience today, if you'd like to converse about the webcast, its content, or anything we're talking about today, please use the event hashtag CXC Go Global, and always feel free to talk about what John Smith from CXC and I will be discussing throughout the course of the webcast. Like I said, great to have audience participation. It'd be great to see some discussion out there on social media as well. I'd like to take a very quick moment and thank today's webinar sponsor for not only sponsoring the webinar today, but also hosting it and bringing it to us all today, CXC Global. They are a leading supplier of global contingent workforce solutions with over 20 years of experience supporting corporations and human capital management partners. CXC Global operates in more than 65 countries worldwide with 30 local offices spread across the globe. With an unmatched suite of services, CXC Global takes care of all administration associated with contractor management, classification, payroll, and compliance. CXC continues to lead the way with the development of new technologies and initiatives, enabling both corporations and individual consultants to adapt in today's high-performance, ever-changing work environment. Thanks again to the folks at CXC for sponsoring and hosting today's webcast. So a very quick overview of today's agenda. And once we get the introductions and background out of the way, we'll talk about the expansion of today's contingent workforce. And honestly, this won't be much of a surprise to anyone about how fast today's contingent workforce is growing, where it's growing, why it's growing, and how it's growing. From there, we'll take a look at why global compliance is critical in today's expanding contingent workforce, and we'll present a whole range of recommendations for action before we wrap up and take some questions from everyone in attendance today. So, like I said, let's get these introductions and background out of the way before we dive into the meat of today's content. A little bit about Ardent Partners. Ardent Partners is a research and advisory firm headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts, that's very much laser focused on promoting and defining, advancing, and most importantly, evangelizing the next-gen supply management strategies, solutions, processes, technologies that ultimately drive business value and spark transformation within today's businesses. Don't be entirely fooled by the fact that Ardent is a supply management research and advisory firm at its core. I've been an analyst for over a decade in this space, and we, even though the bulk of our research is focused on topics like procurement, sourcing, business networks, financial operations, AP, part of what I bring to the firm is expertise on not only the contingent workforce side, but on the complex spend management side. So again, my name is Christopher JDwyer. Very happy to be here. Research Director at Ardent Partners. Those of you in attendance may recognize my name from the 7 years I spent at the Aberdeen Group. Left there about 2.5 years ago to join the folks at Ardent Partners, and really initiated and kick-started their coverage of the contingent workforce management industry. I've been a thought leader in this space for nearly a decade, has some recognition there from HR Today and Supply and Demand Chain Exec Magazine. Really, this is my life's passion. I mean, I have dedicated my life to not only supply management research, but more particularly contingent workforce management research, and written a whole bunch of studies on this topic and how it's evolving and where it's going to go. I am very excited to be joined today by not only CXC Global as a host and sponsor, but also the Managing Director for Americas, John Smith. John, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much for all the time that you've spent helping us get this webinar going. And thanks for the great introduction you gave a little bit earlier about CXC Global. We've been around for 20 years globally. We've been trading here in the United States for just about 5 years now, and we have a very good partnership built with a lot of corporations and human capital management firms, helping them with their contingent workforce needs globally. I myself have been in the industry for about 20 years now, predominantly been in the global payroll and compliance space for basically the past 8 years. Have a lot of experience inside of the human capital and the contingent workforce arena. I spent my early days managing some pretty large scale managed service programs in greater New York City with companies like UBS, Deutsche Bank, Morgan Stanley. So I have a pretty good understanding of where this industry started and basically where this industry is going. The corporate, the global needs that we are seeing brought to us on a daily basis, growing exponentially, and the ever challenging aspects of compliance and managing contractors globally are why we felt it was important for us to partner with Ardent to bring this webinar today to give a firm understanding of where the world is today, where the world is going, and how, if your company or your clients are looking to go global, how CXC Global and Ardent Partners can help. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much, John. Thanks again for joining us today. So a little bit about Ardent's contingent workforce management research before we dive in. I know I sort of teased at the beginning that, hey, don't be fooled by the supply management experts moniker. Back in the day, when I was beginning my analyst career at the Aberdeen Group, not only myself but a lot of other analysts as well, we're looking at the contingent workforce category from a more of a spend management or supply management perspective, and over time, I think that really became limiting because what that did was it really undercut the talent or the workforce related aspects of contingent labor. So like I said, it's been really my life's work to talk about the evolution of contingent workforce, and from tracking its inception years and years ago to following how it became the flex economy that it is today. One thing I will say, no matter, and this is another reason why we'll talk about in a few minutes why it's growing so much and why it's getting so much attention. There's so many phrases today when you talk about the contingent workforce. You hear about the on-demand workforce, on-demand talent, the flex economy, the gig economy, so many different phrases. But at the end of the day, it really all is the same thing. It really links back to the idea that it is a contingent workforce. So Ardent spends a lot of its time talking about the evolution of the space and, of course, where the industry is going to go. Can't talk about evolution without talking about innovation. A lot of emerging and progressive solutions out there today that are actively helping businesses across the globe not only find, source, and engage talent, but also manage sort of the back office processes as well, everything from admin to, of course, compliance management, which we're talking about today, things like SRW, things like workforce management, supplier management, all of those avenues that really form a foundation for contingent workforce management today. And then finally, collaboration. I got my start, for 7 years, I was the Aberdeen Group's leader of their supply management practice, and of course it made sense for me to join a firm that was focused on supply management. But when we're talking about contingent workforce management, it really is all about collaboration. There's no, there's really no value in having just one unit at a company hold all the main responsibility for managing its contingent workforce. So that's why the bulk of our research talks about collaboration between procurement and human capital and HR and other groups like IT operations and the executive suite as well. So getting into the expansion of today's contingent workforce, I think it's really critical to note that there are a few trends that have actively been shaping the contingent workforce and its growth and ultimate evolution. One of those aspects is the fact that it's big. It's growing. It's getting bigger, and we found over the past year that nearly a third of today's total workforce is considered contingent or independent. That's huge. I mean, I remember back to maybe 2009, 2010. My research back then found that maybe a fifth of the overall workforce, about 20%, was considered contingent or independent. 5 years later, we're at a third of the workforce. I mean, if you look around your businesses today, a third of the workers in your company are there on a freelance basis. They're tied to an SRW. They're an independent contractor. That's huge. And bold prediction, it's really not so bold as it was a year ago when I first put this stat out there. But I'm a firm believer that within the next few years, we're going to see that 45 to even 50% of the total workforce across the globe will be considered contingent. So obviously, this isn't an area that we're going to ignore. It's an area that's only going to continue to grow. And more importantly, the vast majority of businesses perceive the contingent workforce as a vital component of their overall business. And what does that mean? That means when you're looking at day-to-day ops, when you're looking at the projects that are happening across the entire spectrum of your organization, of your business, contingent workforce, independent workers, freelancers, contractors, those are workers that are supporting very critical tasks and objectives. And at the end of the day, that's what really matters and why companies need to really reevaluate how they're managing their contingent workforce. And then sort of a downside to all of this is that only 45% of the average organization's overall contingent workforce is actively and actually accounted for in budgeting and planning. And that's huge because that points out one major problem. It's a visibility problem. And as we're going to learn throughout the course of the webcast today, that is especially disconcerting when you're thinking about things like compliance and labor laws and tax codes and some of the aspects of managing an independent workforce from a compliance perspective. Without visibility, you really can't act on it. And there, as John is actually going to go into further on in the webcast today, there are very dire ramifications without that visibility. So is it true growth, or is it evolution, or is it both? I mean, I think that at the end of the day, there are still companies today that when they think of contingent workforce, they think of traditional staff aug, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think years and years and years ago, when you thought of the term contingent labor, contract labor, non-traditional labor, you typically thought of the staffing suppliers that your company used. You thought of more low-level, not necessarily low-level, but more. You think of things like your front desk, or maybe some tasks and some roles across your organization that you could very easily fill with workers sourced via staffing suppliers. So that's where I think the really core, the very beginnings of the contingent workforce actually are. But over time, we've seen that there are more and more evolving types of workers. Freelancers, I mean, we live in a freelance economy. That's really what the flex economy is all about, is that there are millions and millions of workers that are freelancers. They don't tie themselves down to one organization. They have a unique set of skills, and they hold expertise and talent in an area that is very high in demand, and obviously they like the flexibility of not working for just one organization. You think of something like SRW-based labor. SRW management has become a big problem, and we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes, but I think at the end of the day, companies are very hot on the idea of moving into a world where talent, the actual talent, is being put ahead across everything else, like compliance, like costs, like visibility. But with the emergence of more SRW-based work, that's a problem in the long run. And then finally, independent contractors. I mean, again, I'm sure I'm really setting a great stage here for John when in talking about the pitfalls of using independent contractors. High-level talent, but too many organizations ignore the compliance management aspects, and that's really why we're all here today. The global world of talent. I mean, think of the world today, and think of just how interconnected we all are. Think of how easy it is for you to get in touch with someone or do business with or trade with or utilize a supplier that's on the other side of the world. I mean, the dynamics of technology today, the evolution of networks and interconnectivity have turned us into a networked economy that allows for anyone in real time to reach out to someone that's very far away. And what does this mean for the world of talent? Well, we all know at the end of the day, and this is a big challenge, we're going to see this in a couple of minutes, but the number one pressure in organizations today in regards to the contingent workforce is that they need talent and skill sets, and that's sort of the overarching pressure and challenge that's driving them at the end of the day to focus more on enhancing their contingent workforce program. Like I said, think of global networks. We are all interconnected in some very, very profound way. Of course, this is, I mean, it's not just a straight link to the world of talent, but it's everything. I mean, from finance to the stock market to to social media to how music and art is shared. We're all connected via global networks in real time, and that's making it very easy for organizations to find and engage their talent. So there are on-demand sources of labor. Think of the virtual environment that a lot of freelancers and independent contractors work out of. That makes it very easy for someone like me in Boston to find a worker in London, with a snap of the fingers. Very, very simple. And that's fantastic. But at the end of the day, there are too many things that organizations are missing, and their priorities are starting to shift a little bit. But I think that there are too many companies that are leaving behind some very critical elements that they need to address before they move into a world where talent is always going to be the number one concern. So with that said, we're going to actually launch our first poll question, and that should be popping up.
There you go, and thank you, Chris. And I know we have a mix of both corporate clients and also human capital management partners on the call today. So if you can look at this question from your own internal organization, or if you're a human capital management partner, please look at for the programs that you're managing as a whole.
Great, thanks, John. We'll give everyone maybe about 15 more seconds to fill out the poll question, and then we'll talk about the results. It's very interesting to know, and I'll say this before we wrap up this first poll question, to understand where companies are in the spectrum of global contingent workforce management. Like I said, we're all interconnected in some way. It's very easy for us to source talent from across the world, but do we have those processes and capabilities to support globalized contingent workforce management?
So great. Well, thanks, Chris. And just to give everybody an idea, 41% of the respondents said you have a global program in place today. 18% said you have a planned roadmap. 29% plan to implement the program over the next couple of years, and 18% have no plans at this time. Oh, there you go, popped up perfectly.
Great. Thank you so much, John. So back to the content. So Ardent Partners supports some of the things that John was just talking about there. When we asked the organization, what are your global expansion plans for right now and for the years ahead, we found that nearly 30% of companies have a global program currently in place today. Encouraging? Yes. Room for improvement? Of course. But what we found when we dug a little bit deeper is that the vast majority of organizations plan to expand their programs in the next couple of years ahead. And that's especially exciting for this contingent workforce industry. because it shows that I think organizations are starting to catch on to the idea that, number one, they can't just, manage their global world of talent from one very localized office. It takes global expertise. It takes a true global program in order to find, source, engage, and manage talent from across the globe. So very interesting research there. The evolution of the contingent workforce, I want to address this before we move on to some deeper items here. Like I said, the beginnings of the contingent workforce are really staffing based. I mean, it really looked at, we have these, we have a bunch of open positions that are more project based. They years and years ago, they typically weren't linked to more critical, mission critical type programs and objectives and projects. More administration. Think of using someone during tax season, or maybe you have a big legal case coming up, and you need someone to make copies and run files and things like that. Over time, I think as organizations begin to realize the true value of contingent labor and the contingent workforce, and I don't necessarily think that the number one spark, you can all link it back to the economic downturn of 2008, 2009. But I think one very interesting note about that time period was that organizations could not either A, hire back everyone that they had to lay off during those rough times, and B, just act at the beginning of each day like that those economic conditions weren't in place. And I think sort of the C there, the what I call the perfect storm, was that not only did organizations realize the value of their contingent labor, but I think that the workers themselves started to realize how valuable it was for them, and not only their personal lives, but also their careers and the flexibility of their jobs, to turn to a more freelance or independent-based work environment, more flexible-based work environment. And that really, I think, sort of struck the growth in the contingent workforce. Like I said, I think back to 2010, 20% of the workforce was considered contingent or independent. I'm sure if you go back to 2007, it's probably more like 10 or 12%. So you saw a big uptick back then, which leads me to the next point. I think as the contingent workforce grew, it certainly became more complex and more intricate. Things like SRW management, things like compliance management, which we're going to focus in on today, thinking about aspects like identity management, analytics, and business intelligence. Today's contingent workforce programs are very, very dynamic. They're not very simply run by one person in a back office. It's not just a procurement run show. It's not a human capital show. It's really a collaborative mix of these different processes and capabilities that at the end of the day are very complex and intricate. Like I said, talk about SOW management. SOW management can't happen unless you mix workforce management or talent management with supplier management, with spend management, with compliance management. There's so many different avenues here that today's contingent workforce is very, very complex. It makes it very hard to manage. The future of our industry, I think, falls within the idea of total talent management. And I realize some of you may have heard this phrase. It's something that's been catching on the past couple of years. The idea of total talent management, I sometimes refer to it as total workforce optimization, refers to the idea that you have one centralized program utilizing centralized and standardized solutions, integrated technologies, and collaborative development of policies and actual competencies to manage all your talent-based assets and resources under that single program. So the main benefit to that is that at the end of the day, you can say, hey, we have this very big need. What are our available resources? And it doesn't matter what those resources are. It's someone that's already on staff as an FTE, it's a professional service that we use, it's an independent contractor that's in our talent pool, or it's a freelancer or other type of independent worker from a freelance network or online labor marketplace that we know we can tap into. We're able to react in real time to our talent-based needs. That's what total talent management is. That's where we're going to get ahead in the future. But taking it a step back, today's contingent workforce management programs really follow what I call a balancing act. I mean, most importantly, you think of sort of the dynamics of today's contingent workforce. You're not just worried about cost or budget. I mean, you're also worried about things like compliance and visibility. The fact that we're living in a talent-led world means that we're focused on quality and the effectiveness of our talent. I mean, we're going to talk about this in just a few minutes, but when we at Ardent ask organizations, what's your number one challenge, the idea of cost savings or cost reductions, it doesn't come out on top anymore. It's a big problem, yes. It's always going to be a priority, but maintaining talent, keeping quality, upholding the effectiveness of our contingent labor, is a big priority today. Furthermore, the fact that we're not just talking about workers that are doing very menial tasks. Maybe 20, 25, 30 years ago, there was that negative connotation with temp labor. Think of, hey, he or she is a temp. You probably think back to your offices 15, 20 years ago, and that word was very prevalent. But contingent workers today, like I said, 92% of companies today consider it a vital component of their overall business and in their operations. These workers are supporting critical business endeavors, and that's what's making it really tough to manage because it isn't something that we can ignore. And finally, driving visibility and intelligence. I, like many of you, get very, very sick of hearing the phrase big data, but hey, that's the world we live in. Intelligence and visibility are big keys to figuring out the best way to manage your contingent workforce. You have visibility into cost, talent, quality, effectiveness, and compliance. That helps you understand the true impact of your contingent workforce. It helps you build a plan for the future based on the visibility of today. And of course, this is all putting complex pressure on today's contingent workforce management programs. And we are going to talk about one of those key aspects today, the realm of compliance, and why it's so critical for organizations today as they continue to leverage this evolving contingent workforce. So look at the challenges faced by today's contingent workforce management programs. Number one, the need for talent and skill sets. It was very exciting for me, looking back at the 2014-2015 research that we collected, to see that the number one pressure or challenge faced by organizations today was the need for talent and skill sets. I mean, for years and years and years, like I said, I've been an analyst for a decade. I think back to those early years, it wasn't even a fight. Cost savings were always way at the top, and things like visibility or talent were way down the bottom. So it's very exciting to see that we're living in a talent-focused world, and this shows just how important today's contingent workforce is. I mean, I think if it was just another spend category, just another very boring aspect of our business, we'd be worrying about it from a cost perspective or a budget perspective. But today, it's from that talent-led perspective. We're never going to completely get away from the notion of cost and budget, and that's fine. There's honestly nothing wrong with that. When you look at any aspect of your business, anything that's evolving and growing is typically going to translate into dollar signs. I mean, we know that the more freelance workers we use, the more contingent workers we use, the more we rely on our staffing suppliers, it's going to cost us more money. So, of course, we have to figure out a way to reduce costs while continuing to leverage these workers. And finally, lack of visibility and intelligence. There's an aspect of today's contingent workforce that's founded on the notion of intelligence. I mean, think of everything that you can do today with real-time visibility, real-time data. You know where your talent is. You know the impact of that talent. You know what they're working on, who they're working for, and when that project or task is going to be completed. You know what that means from a budget or cost perspective. That's going to help you in the months and years ahead forecast, budget, and plan a lot better based on the intelligence and visibility today. But something missing here, and I know you all know what it is. Only 40% of companies today perceive the mitigation of compliance risks as a true challenge within their contingent workforce management programs. That is very concerning, and I think that as organizations begin to figure out that a big bulk of their overall contingent workforce is comprised of independent and freelance talent, they're going to understand why compliance is such a big deal. And Ardent's coming out with research within the next couple months that's going to break down what the makeup of the contingent workforce today. What percentage is staffing based on average, what percentage is SRW or services based, what percentage is more self-sourced based. So things like your independent contractors and your freelancers. But we're probably talking about 25 to 40% of your overall contingent workforce is comprised of workers that bring a lot of risks when they're mismanaged, and that's that's worrying. So what we've done is we've put together several key compliance impact areas. I'm going to walk through some of these impact areas before I hand things over to John at CXC to talk about some of his insights. But what do you always hear about in the news? Federal audits. I mean, that's one of the big things, reclassification, misclassification. We all know of some of the big brand household names throughout the, from the late 90s, early 2000s, all the way up to today that have been hit with, misclassification suits. It's huge. I mean, you're known as an organization that has mismanaged their independent contractors, and non-compliance can really cost your organization, not only a lot of money, but a lot of stress as well. Things like judgments, consent agreements, or even class action suits by those independent workers can cost the organization a ton of money. I mean, think of some of the big organizations that have faced, some of these judgments or suits, and we're talking about millions and millions of dollars that are paid out by each of these organizations. That's huge. I mean, in an era where you need to do everything you can to gain a competitive edge over everyone else that's trying to do business in your particular industry, the one thing you don't want to get hit with is something like this that's going to cost your organization millions and millions of dollars. And of course, it brings out identity issues. Who are our workers? Where are they? One of the things that when you think about identity management, one of the things that's really worrisome about organizations that don't have really good or really strong or rigorous identity management capabilities is that you don't know who's working where and what they're working on and how fast they're working, or what they have access to. I mean, the horror story that I always hear, think of your freelancers, your independent workers, even those that, not only just those that are virtual, but some of those that are on site. They may have access to certain systems that have, very specific, sensitive data intelligence about your company. I've heard, many horror stories. The one that always sticks out in mind is of the organization that realized that, several of their independent contractors still had access, to their ERP systems. That's that's worrisome. I mean, you wouldn't give someone off the street your your login to to your ERP system. That's identity management is a big problem. Things like shutting down security badges, or deactivating passwords and security and things like that. Adherence to localized and culture-specific labor laws. As organizations begin to expand their programs and they find that they're utilizing talent on a global level, they're going to realize, and this is something that John will talk about, that the labor laws here in the States are very different than those in China or in Brazil or in the UK or in Australia. You need the expertise. You need to know, what those local labor laws are, tax codes, and things like that. Actually, that's popping up now. Tax codes frequently change. Again, something that John can address in his insights coming up. It's very hard for organizations today to manage and utilize global talent because of things like of non-compliance and labor laws and tax codes and things like that. It adds another headache, and that's really sad for those companies that really rely on that talent, because like I said, a big portion of our workforce today is comprised of independent talent, and that's not going to change anytime too soon. And finally, this is something that's sort of not really thought of when you think of compliance, but do you need that global negative publicity? I mean, think of the stigma from so many of those big household names that have had issues with non-compliance and misclassification and judgments and class action suits. You don't want to be that company that at the end of the day is known for something like this. And that's especially concerning as organizations, again, continue to utilize global talent. I'm going to hand things over to John, who's going to give some of his own insights into global compliance.
Perfect. Chris, thank you very much. Yeah, I think one of the most important things to understand is back in 2009 when the USA Internal Revenue Service announced their first round of audits for, I think it was like 3,500 companies were going to be audited for contractor classification. It sent the industry into a big uproar. There was always payroll and compliance companies out there doing a great job, but all of a sudden these companies had to be engaged by corporations to really look at their workforces and say, who is an independent contractor, who is an employee, and what are the rules that govern both sides of it. And basically what's happened over the last 6 years is we're starting to find more and more countries around the world are following the USA leads on contractor and workforce misclassification. We hear it all the time. As Chris mentioned earlier, CXC Global does payroll and compliance management in 65 different countries. We see some countries where the rules are very, very lax. Whether it's a freelancer and an independent contractor, very easy to get it paid. There are other countries now that are following our lead and really making contractors go down a path to prove that they are truly independent, that they shouldn't be employed, and there shouldn't be taxes. The other thing that's really emerged in the past couple of years is all these online payment services. We all know what PayPal is. Anybody that has an eBay account uses it. We've all heard of the company Bitcoin. Whether you've heard good things about them or you've heard bad things about them, it's a very volatile currency, but it's a way for companies and people to interact and trade currencies and make payments throughout the world. What we're seeing, and it's popping up on a regular basis, is countries are starting to pay attention to these online payment services and trying to determine if these payments that are coming into their countries are really for the sale of a good or sale of a product that might be sold by an individual or a company, or is this really a person being paid for a service they're rendering in their country, but it's being benefited by a company outside of their own boundaries. So it's getting very, very concerning. Governments are paying a lot of attention to both of these top two areas. The other thing that is really becoming prevalent and companies are coming to us for now and talking about more and more is, are the contractors set up properly? In the past, it's just been, we have to get somebody engaged. It's the talent our company needs. How do we get them onboarded? How do we get them working? Now it's very important for companies. They don't want to be the next case of all those cases you heard about years ago for underage labor throughout the world. They don't want to be the first company identified for using non-compliant labor globally. So they want to make sure that when they're engaging contractors that they are compliant and they are set up properly. And set up properly really varies in every country of the world. Every country calls things different. The term independent contractor, the term employer of record, the term employed, self-employed, limited company contractor. Every country has different sets of terminologies. Some of them intermingle, where you could be a contractor, but you're entitled to some benefits. We just had that with one of our clients down in Mexico, where a contractor wants to be independent, but wants to be on the Social Security system. This does occur. So it's important that when you're talking to your clients and when you're talking to your own internal employees or your team that's identifying talent for you around the world, that you say, how do we make sure that this person is compliant? We don't want to be viewed by a government around the world or our own government for trying to avoid taxation and avoid any sort of employment cost. And the last thing that's important in most of this is, where and when does tax get added? This is a very unique thing. Tax should always be rendered at a point of service. However, there are rules that allow companies like CXC Global, if we are exchanging revenues between our two sister companies where we don't have to charge tax. However, the country where the contractor is rearing the services and delivering the services, there might be a local utilization of the service that that contractor is performing. So there is a need for that. We find that very prevalent in India. And we find that very prevalent in a lot of the Asian countries where the contractors are working and supporting their clients around the world. However, that client is trading in that product that's being ultimately made or assisted by this contractor. It is being sold and utilized in that country. So does VAT need to be added to an invoice? It's just another way that countries are looking to increase tax revenue. So with that said, we'd like to go into our second and final poll question that will give everybody a good understanding of where you think you are inside your own organization. So if everybody could take a look at this, basically we'd like to know what are some of your company's main concerns in administrating a global contingent workforce program. Is there a lack of buy-in from your own company or from any of your regional offices throughout the world? Is the fact that you don't have the country knowledge in aspect. We find a lot of this, very, very prevalent. We find corporations and human capital partners wanting to jump in and get a good global program going, but we find out that people want to deal with people locally, and there's nothing wrong with that. Asians want to deal with Asians, Europeans want to deal with Europeans. Do they want the mothership or the mother company here in the United States dictating policy? At times, yes. At times, no. How do we find a happy medium for that? So I'll give everybody a couple more seconds to take a look at that, and then we'll close down the poll, and I won't have to give the answers this time since I know that they'll pop up. So why don't we go ahead and close that poll? Thank you, everyone, for responding. So here, pretty much a lack of buy-in. That's actually that's positive. That's one of the lower results in the poll. Obviously, you can see the in-country knowledge is the best thing. And if there is a reason why, if your company or your human capital management company organization doesn't have a local compliance person that knows what's going on around the world, it's important that you partner with somebody that can come in and be a good advisor for you. So with that said, I'll throw it back to Chris. He has a couple other things to go over, and then we'll come back in a little bit later with a little bit more about CXC Global, what we do around the world, and a couple of the questions that I see popping up here on the board as well. Chris, back to you.
Thank you, John. Another great poll. Thanks for throwing that up. So as we move back into the webcast here, one very interesting aspect of our partners research, not only discussing the market trends, not only talking about the evolution of the contingent workforce and where it's going, where it could go, but it's also talking about the third-party solutions, the technologies that organizations are leveraging to better manage their respective contingent workforce. And in recent Ardent Partners research, brand new Ardent Partners research, we point to the value of outsourced compliance management. And what you see here are some very critical yet very standardized compliance management capabilities and competencies that are more enabled in companies that have outsourced their compliance management into a third party. Think about things like consistent compliance reviews across your total contractor base. I mean, you may think that's a very simple capability, but the fact is only a quarter of companies today that don't have a solution, that are not utilizing an outsourced service, are actually able to utilize this type of capability. Consistency is a big key here. When you're talking about global compliance, consistency and standardization are really two very, very fundamental components of that. It is often within those sort of missed avenues, or the way that companies sometimes just forget to do something, forget to look at a relationship between themselves and a contractor or a freelancer that can really ultimately prove to be their undoing. And what we found here at Ardent and the Ardent Partners research is that utilizing an outsourced technology provider or service or solution to help with that helps ensure consistency and standardization. Looking at something like regular reviews of contract relationships, again, links back to the idea of consistency, being able every day to look at your relationships, to evaluate them, and ensure that that your business is being compliant across all global areas. John, kick it right back to you. You want to talk about some items that have been in the news?
I think Uber has been pounded in the media lately. You hear it everywhere. A posting I just saw today about how Belgium, the country of Belgium, indicated that contractors are contractors working for Uber. Here in the United States, we have states saying that they aren't independent contractors. So this is just some of the recent headlines, and everybody's going to get a copy of the webinar at the end, so you can click and link further and look and take a look at it. But this is just over the past 60 days. These are some of the major headlines that have hit the international wires, talking about contractors and talking about taxes and talking about compliance. Again, it's all driven by governments realizing that they have a shift inside of their population from employed workers to contract workers. And governments want to make sure, whether they're state, provincial, or the federal governments, they want to make sure they are receiving proper taxes. And companies are paying taxes, and the contractors are paying taxes. What we felt the importance here is just to bring everybody aware that this is what's out there, and while it may be a very small sample, governments watch, and the industry is talking about it. So everybody will get, as I said, everybody will get a copy of this and be happy to read through it afterwards. As we talked about during the webinar, Chris talked about it, I talked about it a little bit. You really don't want your company to be the first company to be, viewed as the first poster child for global misclassification of workers. We all know what's happened here. You had Microsoft, a lot of bad publicity there. FedEx. You had a lot of companies really becoming the poster childs for contractor misclassification here, and it's starting to be viewed globally just as important. So we are here to make sure that your company or your clients, your partners, are not the first ones having that problem. These freelance economies are growing every day. I mean, there was just a recent merger announced yesterday between two over in Europe. And it's happening every day, and more and more contractors are prevailing their services through these various websites that offer them to come in and engage their services globally. What we recently learned is PayPal now requires a social security number for any U.S. citizen. Back, I don't know, 8 years ago, 5 years ago, when I first signed up for PayPal to buy a couple things on eBay, I didn't have to give my social security number. Now you do. Because the U.S. government wants to know where revenue is coming into. So if you think about it, it's all about taxable revenue. And if you ever purchase anything on eBay, think about your state. Your state is not getting sales tax for that. So they're asking you on your tax return at the end of the year, did you buy anything electronically and not pay tax in the store? Don't be surprised if in a year or two, if there's a question on your tax return, did you earn any income through an online payment system that wasn't reported on a 1099 or any other form. And I guess the most important thing to say, and I've been in this industry now for 8 years, I saw it really start to take off globally from contractors and being able to do global compliance, is compliance can be relatively easily achieved. The important part is you have to have global buy-in internally. Your clients, whether they're your internal corporate clients, if you're a corporation, if you're a human capital partner, if you have buy-in internally to make this happen, and you have a partner who you can trust to basically take you avoid and help you grow along the way, this can be achieved. It's not without pain. It's not without problems. It's not without a lot of qualification. Every country is different. but it certainly can be done with a little bit of time and a little bit of effort.
Thanks, John.
You're very welcome, Chris.
Before we go into the audience Q&A, I want to make sure we save some time for that. I'd very, very quickly like to go over just some recommendations for action. I mean, I think it's always beneficial for everyone when they attend a webinar to have, not necessarily just a recap, but, what are the 3 core takeaways that we can bring back to, our respective organizations. And first item, understand the impact of globalization in all of its forms. Think of just how big your contingent workforce is growing. Think of its impact. Think of all of the talent you're utilizing across the entire world, especially if you're, a bigger, more global type of company. You need to understand the impact of all of that on your organization. Where is the talent coming from? How are we engaging it? How are we sourcing it? I mean, most importantly, how are we finding it? And of course, are we being compliant? Do we have visibility? Think about all those things that I talked about at the beginning of the webinar in relation to globalization. Do we know the impact? Do we know what it means for our organization? Balance talent engagement with compliance strategies. Like I said, there's always a lot of excitement around the contingent workforce and the industry at large. Thinking about how quickly we can source and find talent, how quickly we can engage the skill sets we need. But we need to do that with a more compliant eye. John talked at length about the impact areas. I talked about them as well. It's very critical today in today's more talent-based world, talent-led world, to ensure compliance, ensure that we have consistency and standardization in everything we do in relation to to our independent talent. Finally, look to outside experts and solutions for additional support. I think at the end of the day, I mean, there's some organizations that, regardless of the business process, are sometimes afraid, whether it's just a budget related or it's just an internal stigma about looking to the outside for help. But as this industry grows and grows and evolves even more so than it has done over the past couple of years, it's going to happen quickly. It's going to happen seemingly overnight. And a lot of organizations just can't wait until 6 months from now, a year from now, to look to that outside expertise to help them not only manage their global contingent workforce, but also manage aspects like compliance.
Great.
If
Chris, we got about 5 minutes left, and I have about 10 questions. So why don't we take a couple questions? And
yeah, that's fine.
And what I'll do is we're not going to be able to get to all the questions since we only got about 5 minutes left. So everybody will get a full copy of all the questions, and we'll answer them all. Either Chris or CXC Global will answer them. Chris, the first question actually came in for you. Talk a little bit about the idea of total talent management.
It's so total talent management. I use the word exciting a lot, but it really is one of the more exciting aspects of today's contingent workforce. Like I said earlier, it's really the idea that you can manage all of your talent-based resources under a centralized, standardized program of processes, capabilities, and integrated solutions. The reason why it's more of an ideal now, more than an actual, more than an actual program today, is that it's very tough to get going. I mean, organizations today, in order to get a total talent management program off the ground, they have to have pure collaboration between procurement and HR. You need to integrate your VMS with RPO and MSP with RPO and talent acquisition. If you're utilizing a freelancer management system, can that information be sent right to your VMS? A lot of complex, intricate, moving parts to that. But that's where the industry is going. I mean, I think that when you look 5 or 6 years down the line, I think that more and more companies will have a centralized program, a total talent management program for all of their talent.
Perfect. Great, Chris. Thank you. The second question that came in, and actually there was 2 versions of pretty much the same question, is about how contractors have to get paid around the world. Do they have to get paid in their in their local currency? The answer to this is really specific on each and every country. Every country has laws whether contractors have to get paid in their local currency or can they get paid in one of the major currencies throughout the world. The thing that CXC Global has realized over the years is we are seeing more and more contractors trying to submit invoices to us when their currency is strong against the dollar or the pound or the Hong Kong dollar, and what we'll see is we'll actually see a contractor sit on invoices, and then once their currency gets strong, try to basically submit a bunch of invoices. We highly try to stay away from that. What we do recommend is that there is a way for companies like CXC Global to help manage that currency for you. There is a cost to do it, but we do it a good capability to assist our clients to have a bill that can come to them in any of their local currencies, and CXC can manage and pay you here, manage your invoice and do everything here domestically for you. Another question that came in, and this will be the last question because we're running tight on time here. Our employment structure is basically the same for all contractors around the world. We talked about that a little bit earlier, and the answer to that is no. Just because somebody is employed doesn't mean they're employed the same way as a contractor here in the United States or a contractor anywhere throughout the world. And the term independent contractor, I mean, there are so many interpretations of this around the world. Some can be considered a limited company contractor, self-employed, freelancer, corp-to-corp contractor. So there is no standard terminology that's used, and employment structures, again, are really all based by the local standards, and CXC does our best to basically stay in compliance there. So Chris, I think that'll get us just about wrapped up here.
Yes, thank you, John. Thanks to everyone for attending. Like John said, everyone would get a copy of the slides, so if there's something you missed or you joined late or had to drop off, you'll receive a copy of the slides in the days to come. John and I left our contact info up on the slide throughout the Q&A. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions at all. I also left my LinkedIn profile up there as well, so feel free to connect on LinkedIn, or any questions at all. Don't hesitate to reach out to John and myself. And on behalf of John and the CXC Global team, thanks so much for attending, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.